A single human ship destroyed an entire alien civilization. Captain Saracen stared at the massive alien structure floating in the void of space. The horizon's edge, her exploration vessel, seemed like a tiny speck compared to the enormous crystalline city that stretched for hundreds of kilometers in every direction. Beautiful spiraling towers made of what looked like living glass twisted upward, pulsing with soft blue and purple lights. "My God," whispered Dr. Marcus Webb, the ship's xenobiologist, as he pressed his face against the observation deck window. "It's magnificent. Look at those patterns in the crystal formations. They're not random, there's intelligence behind this design." Sarah nodded slowly. After 18 months of deep space exploration, they had finally found what humanity had been searching for since the first radio telescopes pointed toward the stars, proof that we were not alone in the universe. "Dr. Reeves, what are your instruments telling us?" Sarah asked, turning to the ship's science officer. Dr. Janet Reeves looked up from her console, her eyes wide with excitement. "Captain, the energy readings are off the charts. This isn't just a city, it's alive. The entire structure is one massive organism, and it's generating power levels that dwarf our fusion reactors. The bioelectrical activity suggests a collective consciousness." The alien city, if you could call it that, hung in space near a dying red star. There were no planets in this system, just the star and this incredible structure that seemed to have been grown rather than built. Delicate tendrils of crystal extended outward like the roots of some cosmic tree, collecting energy from the star's radiation. "Captain," called Communications Officer Torres from his station. "I'm picking up signals. Complex patterns, definitely artificial. They know we're here." Sarah felt her heart race. First contact protocols raced through her mind, all the training and preparation that seemed so theoretical back on Earth. Now it was real. They were about to make contact with an alien civilization. "Open a channel," she ordered. "Let's try the standard mathematical sequences first." Torres nodded and began transmitting prime numbers, followed by the Fibonacci sequence. For several minutes, there was only silence. Then, suddenly, the alien city began to pulse with new patterns of light, and the ship's speakers crackled to life. The sound was unlike anything they had ever heard, a harmony of tones that seemed to bypass the ears and speak directly to the mind. Somehow, impossibly, Sarah found she could understand it. "Welcome, distant children. We are the Etherians. We have watched your small vessel approach with curiosity. You are far from your birth world, *. Dr. Webb grabbed Sarah's arm. "Captain, this is incredible. They're communicating through some kind of telepathic resonance. The universal translator isn't even needed, they're projecting meaning directly into our consciousness." Sarah stepped forward, feeling strangely calm despite the magnitude of the moment. "I am Captain Saracen of the Earth vessel Horizon's Edge. We come in peace, seeking knowledge and friendship among the stars." The lights in the alien city pulsed brighter, and the telepathic voice returned, warmer this time. "Peace. Yes, we understand this concept well. We are ancient, children of Earth. We have existed in this form for over 10 million of your years. We are gardeners of the cosmos, nurturing life wherever we find it. Your species is young but shows promise, *. 10 million years, Dr. Reeves breathed. They've been spacefaring since before humans evolved." The Etherian voice continued. "We would welcome you aboard our vessel. There is much we could share, much your species could learn. But first, we must ensure you bring no contamination, *. Sarah frowned. "Contamination? We've followed strict protocols. Our ship is clean. Not biological contamination, young captain. We speak of something far more dangerous. Your species carries within it the seeds of violence and destruction. We have observed your history through the electromagnetic emissions that travel between your stars. War, genocide, the destruction of your own birth world's ecosystems. These are the true contaminations, *. The mood on the bridge grew tense. Sarah could feel her crew shifting uncomfortably. It was true, humanity's history was stained with violence. Even now, Earth was struggling with climate change, political conflicts, and resource depletion. "We're trying to do better," Sarah said. "That's why we're out here. To find new perspectives, to learn from civilizations like yours. Asterisk perhaps. But we cannot take that risk. We have survived for 10 million years by being careful. We have seen species like yours before, young, aggressive, expanding rapidly across the galaxy like a virus. They always bring destruction in their wake, asterisk." Dr. Webb stepped forward. "But surely you can see that we're explorers, not conquerors. We have only one ship, a handful of crew members. How could we possibly threaten a civilization as advanced as yours?" The alien city pulsed with what seemed like amusement. Asterisk, "You misunderstand the nature of the threat, small one. It is not your numbers or your weapons we fear. It is your ideas. Your concepts of ownership, of conquest, of individual gain over collective good. These thoughts are virulent. They spread and corrupt. They turn harmonious societies into fractured, warring tribes, asterisk." "That's not fair," Dr. Reeves protested. "You're judging our entire species based on our worst impulses. We also have art, music, love, sacrifice for others. We have people who dedicate their lives to helping strangers, protecting the weak, preserving knowledge. Asterisk, this is true. Your species does have beauty within it. But beauty and horror often grow from the same root. Your capacity for self-sacrifice comes from the same source as your capacity for genocide, the ability to define us in them, to love some and hate others, asterisk." Sarah felt a chill run down her spine. There was something in the alien's tone that had changed, becoming colder, more distant. "What are you saying exactly?" Asterisk, "We are saying that we cannot allow you to return to your homeworld with knowledge of our existence. The risk is too great. Your species would find a way to exploit this knowledge, to turn it into a weapon or a tool of conquest. You have done this with every discovery in your history, asterisk." "Now wait just a minute," Sarah said, her captain's training taking over. "You're talking about holding us prisoner based on what you think we might do. That's not justice, that's prejudice." Asterisk, "Is it prejudice to quarantine a plague carrier? Is it prejudice for a gardener to remove weeds before they can spread? We do not act from hatred, Captain Chen. We act from necessity, asterisk." The lights in the alien city began to shift, taking on a reddish hue. Sarah could feel something changing in the ship's systems. Warning lights began flashing on the bridge consoles. "Captain," Torres called out, his voice tight with concern. "They're scanning us with some kind of energy beam. It's penetrating our hull like it's not even there. Asterisk, we are examining your vessel and its contents. We must understand the full extent of the contamination before we decide how to proceed, asterisk." Dr. Reeves looked up from her scanner. "Captain, whatever they're doing, it's incredibly sophisticated. They're not just scanning our technology, they're reading our computer files, our personal logs, even our DNA patterns." Sarah felt violated and angry. "Stop this immediately. You have no right to invade our privacy." Asterisk, privacy. Another of your concepts that we find problematic. You compartmentalize knowledge, hide truth, build barriers between minds. How can there be understanding without transparency? How can there be trust without openness, asterisk? The scanning continued for several more minutes. Sarah and her crew could only watch helplessly as their most private thoughts and memories were laid bare to the alien intelligence. It was like being dissected while still alive. Finally, the red light faded, and the alien voice returned, now heavy with what sounded like sadness. Asterisk, we have seen enough. Your minds are exactly as we feared, brilliant and creative, but also paranoid and tribal. Even now, as we speak peacefully, your thoughts turn to weapons, to ways you might fight us or escape to warn your people. You cannot help yourselves. It is your nature, asterisk. Of course we're thinking about defending ourselves, Sarah snapped. You're holding us against our will and threatening us. What did you expect? Asterisk, we expected exactly this. Your first instinct is always conflict, always violence. Even your Dr. Webb, your most peaceful scientist, is now wondering if there's a way to sabotage our systems from within. Your Dr. Reeves is calculating whether your ship's fusion reactor could be overloaded to create a weapon. It is not malice that drives these thoughts, it is simply what you are. Sarah looked around at her crew and saw the truth in their faces. Even in this moment of first contact, even faced with beings of unimaginable wisdom and power, their human instincts were indeed turning toward conflict and survival. Maybe that's true, she admitted. Maybe we are paranoid and violent. But we're also capable of growth, of learning, of change. Give us a chance to prove it. We have given chances before. Twice in our long existence, we have encountered species similar to yours. Both times, we chose mercy. Both times, we regretted it. The alien city began to shift and change, its crystalline structure rearranging itself into new configurations. Weapon ports opened along its surface, not crude missile tubes or laser cannons, but something far more elegant and terrifying. The very fabric of space around them began to ripple and distort. The first species called themselves the Dominion. They were master geneticists, capable of reshaping life itself. We shared our knowledge of bioengineering with them, hoping to help them heal their dying worlds. Instead, they used our gifts to create biological weapons of unimaginable horror. They turned entire star systems into necropolis before we could stop them. Images flashed through the minds of Sarah and her crew, visions of planets covered in writhing, mutated flesh, of space itself corrupted by living diseases that consumed everything they touched. The second species were the builders. Master engineers who carved mountains and drained oceans to fuel their great works. We taught them how to manipulate matter at the quantum level. They used this knowledge to construct machines that devoured planets to fuel their endless expansion. 11 civilizations died before we were forced to act. More images flooded their minds, mechanical swarms that consumed worlds like locusts, leaving behind only sterile metal spheres where once there had been life and beauty. Both times, we thought we could guide them, teach them wisdom along with knowledge. Both times, their nature proved stronger than our influence. We will not make that mistake a third time. But we're not them, Dr. Webb pleaded. Every species is different. You can't condemn us for the crimes of others. Can we not? You humans have a saying, those who cannot remember the past are condemned to repeat it. We remember. We remember very well. The space around the horizon's edge continued to distort. Sarah could feel the ship's hull beginning to stress under forces she couldn't even comprehend. But it wasn't just their ship that was being affected, she could see that the distortions were spreading outward, creating an expanding bubble of twisted space-time. Captain, Dr. Reeves called out, her voice filled with growing horror as she read her instruments. What they're doing, it's not just a weapon. They're creating some kind of space-time cascade. The effects are going to propagate outward at light speed. Sarah's blood went cold. How far outward? At least 50 light-years, maybe more. It's hard to tell with the quantum fluctuations, but... Captain, Earth is only 43 light-years from here. The alien voice spoke again, now with a tone of final judgment. We are sorry, children of Earth. But we cannot allow your species to spread its contamination to the galaxy. The cascade will sterilize this entire region of space, erasing all trace of your civilization before it can become a threat to others. It is necessary, You're talking about genocide. Sarah shouted. You're going to kill billions of innocent people. Innocent? Your species has driven thousands of other species on your homeworld to extinction. You have poisoned your own air and water. You wage war over resources, over beliefs, over the color of your skin. Where is the innocence in that, Those are our failures, yes, but they're not the whole story. You're ignoring all the good we've done, all the beauty we've created. Our music, our art, our literature. The way we care for our children, the way we sacrifice for strangers. The fact that we sent this ship out here not to conquer, but to explore and learn. Your art celebrates violence. Your literature is filled with tales of conquest and domination. Even your music speaks of possession and ownership, my love, my country, my God. Everything with your species comes back to ownership and conflict, asterisk. Dr. Webb stepped forward desperately. But that's changing. Yes, we have a violent past, but we're learning. We've started to work together as a species. We've begun to heal our world. The very fact that we built this ship and sent it out peacefully shows that we're capable of better. Asterisk, one ship does not represent an entire species. For every explorer you send out, how many soldiers do you train? For every scientist working for the betterment of all, how many work to create new weapons? No, we have seen enough. The decision is made, asterisk. The cascade effect was growing stronger. Sarah could feel it in her bones now, a deep thrumming that seemed to shake the very atoms of her body. In the distance, she could see stars beginning to flicker and distort as the wave of destruction spread outward. But something else was happening too. The enormous strain of creating the cascade was affecting the alien city itself. Cracks were appearing in its crystalline structure, and the harmonious patterns of light were becoming chaotic and unstable. Dr. Reeves, Sarah called out urgently. Can you analyze what's happening to their city? Dr. Reeves bent over her console, her fingers flying across the controls. Captain, the energy requirements for this cascade are massive. They're pouring their entire civilization's power reserves into it. The structural integrity of their city is failing under the strain. How long do we have before the cascade reaches Earth? At light speed, about 43 years. But Captain, that's not the worst part. The cascade isn't just going to sterilize our solar system, it's going to create a permanent dead zone in space. Nothing will ever be able to live in this region again. Sarah stared out at the dying alien city, her mind racing. 43 years. Her daughter back on Earth would be in her 70s when the cascade arrived. Her grandchildren would die in a cosmic fire created by humanity's first contact with another intelligent species. But there was something else, something Dr. Reeves had said that sparked an idea. The aliens were pouring everything they had into this attack. They were literally dying to kill humanity. Dr. Webb, she called out. You said earlier that their city is one massive organism, right? A collective consciousness? Yes, Captain. The entire structure is alive. It's like a single gigantic brain made of living crystal. And if that brain were to be damaged or destroyed, Dr. Webb's eyes widened with understanding. The cascade would stop. Without the controlling intelligence to maintain it, the space-time distortions would collapse back on themselves. Sarah looked around at her crew, seeing the same terrible understanding in their faces. There was a way to stop the cascade, to save Earth and humanity. But it would require them to commit the very act of violence that the aliens claimed defined their species. Captain, Torres said quietly, if we overload our fusion reactor and ram their city, we'd be proving them right, Sarah finished. We'd be showing that when faced with annihilation, our first instinct is to destroy our destroyers. Asterisk, we can hear your thoughts, Captain Chen. Even now, you plot violence. Even faced with just punishment for your species' crimes, you think only of revenge. This is precisely why you cannot be allowed to survive, asterisk. It's not revenge, Sarah said aloud. It's survival. And maybe you're right about us. Maybe we are violent and territorial and paranoid. But we're also something else, we're stubborn. We don't give up. We don't accept defeat, even when it's logical. She turned to her crew, seeing fear and determination in equal measure on their faces. I won't order anyone to die with me. Anyone who wants to try to escape in the shuttle pod should do so now. No one moved. Dr. Webb stepped forward. Captain, if we do this, we'll be committing genocide ourselves. We'll be destroying a civilization that's existed for 10 million years. A civilization that's about to commit genocide against ours, Dr. Reeves pointed out grimly. Does that make it right? Dr. Webb asked. Sarah looked out at the alien city, its beautiful crystalline spires now crackling with destructive energy. She thought about Earth, about her daughter, about all the humans who would never know that their destruction had been set in motion by a peaceful exploration mission. Maybe it doesn't make it right, she said finally. Maybe it just makes it necessary. And maybe that's what they never understood about us. We don't always do what's right. Sometimes we do what's necessary, even when it damns us. She turned to her crew. All hands, prepare for reactor overload. Set a collision course for the center of their city. As the ship's engines roared to life and they began their final approach, the alien voice spoke one last time, no longer cold and judgmental, but filled with something that might have been respect. We understand now, Captain Chen. You were willing to become the monsters we claimed you were in order to protect your own. Perhaps we were wrong about your species. Perhaps you are not monsters by nature, but by necessity. We go to our end knowing that we have created the very thing we sought to prevent, a humanity that will remember this day and harden its heart against the cosmos, *. Maybe, Sarah replied, her hands steady on the controls as the alien city grew larger in the view screen. Or maybe we'll remember this day and learn to be better. Maybe we'll learn to build defenses without becoming the thing we're defending against. Maybe we'll prove that survival and wisdom can coexist. We will never know, will we? No, Sarah said sadly. We won't. The horizon's edge struck the alien city at nearly a quarter of the speed of light. The overloaded fusion reactor detonated at the moment of impact, releasing more energy than a small star. The crystalline structure of the Etherian city shattered like glass, its 10-million-year-old consciousness scattered across the void in a cascade of dying light. The space-time cascade collapsed immediately, the wave of destruction that would have sterilized 50 light-years of space folding back on itself and dissipating harmlessly. Earth was safe. But as the alien city died, it sent out one final transmission, not to the horizon's edge, which was now nothing but expanding plasma, but broadcast toward Earth on a tight-beam radio signal that would take 43 years to arrive. The message was simple: we tried to save you from yourselves. We failed. The humans who destroyed us were brave and noble, but they were still human. Beware the species that calls itself humanity. They will choose survival over righteousness, necessity over mercy. They are coming to the stars, and they are more dangerous than they know. 43 years later, the radio telescopes of Earth would detect this message. By then, humanity had spread to dozens of star systems, had encountered and peacefully contacted several other alien species, and had begun to build a galactic civilization based on cooperation and mutual respect. The message from the dead Etherians would be studied, debated, and ultimately filed away as a curiosity, the final words of a species that had been too afraid of what humanity might become to see what it actually was becoming. But in the deepest archives of Earth's xenological databases, a note would be added to the file: the Etherians were not entirely wrong. We are a species capable of great violence when threatened. The question is not whether we will face such threats again, but whether we will have learned enough about ourselves by then to find better solutions than the one Captain Chen was forced to choose. And in the cold depths of space, where once a beautiful crystal city had grown and thrived for 10 million years, there was now only empty void and the slowly expanding glow of a dying star. The Etherians were gone, destroyed by the very species they had tried to save the galaxy from. Whether they had been right or wrong about humanity would remain a question for the ages. But one thing was certain: in their final moments, they had learned something that 10 million years of cosmic gardening had never taught them. Sometimes the most dangerous creatures in the universe are the ones who refuse to accept their fate quietly. The universe was a little darker for their passing, and a little more dangerous for humanity's survival. But it was also proof that even in the face of overwhelming odds, even when faced with powers beyond comprehension, humans would find a way to endure. Captain Sarah Chen and her crew had saved their species by destroying another. Whether that made them heroes or villains would be debated by philosophers and historians for centuries to come. But in the end, they had done what humans had always done throughout their long and violent history: they had survived. The Etherian Legacy. Earth Sol System, 43 years after the Etherian incident ***. Dr. Elena Vasquez stood before the massive holographic display in the Xenological Research Institute's main auditorium, her weathered hands trembling slightly as she prepared to address the assembled delegates from across human space. At 91, she was one of the last living scientists who had worked on the original Etherian transmission when it had arrived 4 decades earlier. The hologram showed the reconstructed image of the alien city, that magnificent crystalline structure that had existed for 10 million years before Captain Saracen had been forced to destroy it. Elena had spent most of her adult life studying every fragment of data they had recovered from that encounter, and the weight of that knowledge had aged her far beyond her years. "Colleagues," she began, her voice carrying clearly through the chamber's acoustics, "today marks the 43rd anniversary of what historians call the Etherian incident, though I have always believed that term minimizes the true magnitude of what occurred. We are not here merely to commemorate the dead, but to confront a question that has haunted our species since we first received their final transmission: were they right about us?" In the audience, representatives from the Martian colonies, the Europa research stations, the asteroid mining consortiums, and the new settlements in the Alpha Centauri system shifted uncomfortably. Also present were delegates from the 3 alien species humanity had encountered and peacefully contacted in the decades since the Etherian incident: the aquatic Delphinians, the silicon-based crystallites, and the energy beings known as the Lumina. Elena gestured to the hologram, which now displayed the radio telescope arrays that had first detected the Etherian transmission. "When their message reached us, we were a different species than we are today. We had just achieved interstellar travel, had barely established our first colonies beyond Sol. We were still learning what it meant to be a spacefaring civilization." The hologram shifted to show humanity's expansion over the past 4 decades, dozens of colonies, peaceful first contacts, the establishment of the Galactic Cooperation Council, and the joint research stations where humans worked alongside their alien partners. "By all external measures," Elena continued, "we have proven the Etherians wrong. We have not become the galactic plague they feared. We have not spread violence and destruction across the stars. Instead, we have built something unprecedented, a truly cooperative interstellar civilization." She paused, her eyes finding the Delphinian delegate, whose bioluminescent patches pulsed in what Elena recognized as agreement. The crystallites representative maintained its characteristic stillness, while the Lumina delegate flickered between visible and invisible spectrums in its equivalent of a nod. "But," Elena said, her voice growing heavier, "there is something else we must discuss. Something that has been classified at the highest levels for 4 decades, known only to a handful of researchers and government officials. Today, that classification ends." A murmur rippled through the audience. Elena touched a control on her podium, and the hologram changed to show a star map of local space, with Earth at the center and an expanding sphere of light representing the collapsed spacetime cascade. "What you are seeing is not just the area that would have been sterilized by the Etherian cascade. What you are seeing is something we discovered only recently, through our joint research with the Lumina, who can perceive dimensions of spacetime that remain invisible to us." The sphere pulsed, and Elena could see the alien delegates leaning forward with interest while the human representatives looked confused and concerned. The cascade did not simply collapse when the Etherian city was destroyed. It left scars, permanent alterations to the fabric of spacetime itself. Regions where the laws of physics operate differently, where faster-than-light travel becomes impossible, where certain forms of energy cannot exist. The implications began to dawn on the audience. Admiral Rebecca Santos, representing the Solar Defense Force, stood up. "Dr. Vasquez, are you saying that the Etherian weapon is still active?" "Not active," Elena corrected. "But its effects are permanent. We estimate that within another century, these distortions will have expanded to encompass nearly 100 light-years of space. No ships will be able to enter or leave this region. We will be trapped in what amounts to a cosmic quarantine zone." The chamber erupted in shocked murmurs and urgent whispers. Elena waited for quiet to return before continuing. "The Etherians did not fail, colleagues. They succeeded beyond their wildest dreams. They created a prison that will contain humanity for the rest of our existence as a species. And they did so using our own survival instinct as the trigger." Dr. Kenji Nakamura, the lead physicist from the Mars Research Collective, raised his hand. "Dr. Vasquez, why wasn't this information shared earlier? Why keep it classified?" Elena's expression grew grim. "Because of what it might have caused us to become. The moment humanity learns it is trapped, that our expansion is limited, that our future is constrained, what do you think would happen?" Would we continue to cooperate peacefully with our alien neighbors? Would we maintain our commitment to nonviolence and mutual benefit? Or would we begin to compete for the limited space available to us? The question hung in the air like a toxic cloud. Elena could see the understanding dawning on faces throughout the audience, humans and aliens alike. The Etherians' final gift to the galaxy, Elena said bitterly, was to make their prophecies self-fulfilling. The moment we truly understand our situation, we risk becoming exactly what they claimed we always were. Kepler 442b, Colonial Administration Center, 2 weeks later. Governor Marcus Webchin, grandson of Dr. Marcus Webb from the original Horizon's Edge mission, stood in his office overlooking New Geneva, the capital city of humanity's most distant colony. At 38, he bore a striking resemblance to his grandfather, but where the elder Webb had been driven by scientific curiosity, Marcus was shaped by the weight of inherited knowledge. His surname carried both names as a reminder: Webb for the scientist who had advocated for peaceful contact, Chin for the captain who had chosen necessary violence. The duality was not lost on him as he reviewed the classified reports that had arrived via quantum entanglement transmitter. The door chimed, and his aide announced the arrival of Dr. Zahra al-Rashid, the colony's chief xenobiologist and one of the few people on Kepler 442b who had security clearance high enough to discuss the Etherian situation. "You've read Elena's report?" Marcus asked without preamble. Zahra nodded, her dark eyes troubled. "I've run the calculations 3 times using our own observations of local space-time distortions. If anything, her estimates are conservative. The quarantine zone might expand even faster than predicted." Marcus turned to look out at the city below, where humans worked alongside crystallite partners in the crystal farms that were their primary export to the wider galaxy. The sight that had once filled him with pride now felt ominous. "How long do we have before the distortions reach us?" he asked. 87 years, Zahra replied. "Give or take a decade. This system will be cut off from Earth, from the other colonies, from our alien partners. We'll be alone." "Not alone," Marcus corrected grimly. "Trapped. There's a difference." He moved to his desk and activated a secure holographic display showing population projections, resource assessments, and territorial analyses. "I've been running scenarios since Elena's announcement. The mathematics are brutal." The display showed the expanding quarantine zone and the star systems it would eventually encompass. 17 human colonies, 3 joint human-alien research stations, and the home systems of 2 of their alien partners would be caught inside the barrier. "If Elena is right about human nature," Marcus continued, "then the moment this information becomes public, cooperation ends. The various colonies will begin competing for resources, for territory, for the right to survive in a limited space. The aliens trapped with us will become competitors instead of partners." Zahra studied the projections with a scientist's eye. "But the alternative is worse. If we keep this secret, if we continue pretending that expansion is unlimited, then when the barrier finally manifests, the shock will be even more devastating. People will feel betrayed, lied to. That could trigger exactly the kind of violent response the Etherians predicted." Marcus nodded slowly. He had been wrestling with this dilemma for weeks, and the weight of decision was crushing. "There's a third option," he said quietly. "One that Elena didn't mention in her report." He manipulated the holographic display, showing the current location of humanity's fastest research vessels. "We could try to escape the quarantine zone before it fully forms. Evacuate as many people as possible to colonies beyond the projected barrier." "That would mean abandoning billions of people," Zahra said, her voice horrified. "The logistics alone would be impossible. We don't have enough ships, enough time, enough resources. Which means we have to choose who gets saved and who gets left behind," Marcus finished. "We'd become exactly what the Etherians accused us of being, a species that sacrifices the many for the survival of the few." The two stood in silence for several minutes, contemplating the impossible choice before them. Finally, Zahra spoke. "Marcus, there's something else. Something I haven't told anyone yet." She manipulated the display, showing quantum resonance patterns that Marcus didn't recognize. I've been working with the Lumina delegation, studying the nature of the space-time distortions. They're not random. They're not just scars left by an ancient weapon. What are you saying? I'm saying they're purposeful. Designed. The Etherians didn't just create a weapon that would quarantine humanity, they created a test. Marcus felt his blood chill. What kind of test? Zara's expression was grave. The distortions respond to certain types of energy signatures. Specifically, they respond to the quantum resonance of consciousness itself. If a species can achieve a truly unified consciousness, not just cooperation, but actual mental unity, the barriers become permeable. You're talking about a hive mind. Not exactly. More like transcendence. The Lumina think the Etherians built this as a final examination for any species aggressive enough to destroy them. Can they evolve beyond their violent nature quickly enough to escape their prison? Can they become something greater than what they were? Marcus sank into his chair, overwhelmed by the implications. And if we can't? Then we remain trapped until we either transcend or destroy ourselves. The perfect quarantine, one that only ends when we're no longer a threat to the galaxy. Europa Research Station, Outer Sol System, 6 months later. Dr. Amara Singh floated in a zero-gravity meditation chamber, her consciousness linked to the experimental neural interface that connected her to the station's quantum computer array. Around her, holographic displays showed the brain patterns of volunteers from all 4 species: human, Delphinian, Crystallite, and Lumina. For the past 6 months, since Zara al-Rashid's discovery about the nature of the Etherian barriers, a small team of researchers had been working in absolute secrecy to understand what transcendence might actually mean. The project, codenamed Unity, represented humanity's most desperate gamble. Dr. Singh, came the voice of her assistant, Dr. Yuki Tanaka, through the chamber's comm system. We're getting some interesting resonance patterns from the Lumina volunteer. Amara opened her eyes and studied the displays. The Lumina's energy patterns were fluctuating in ways that seemed almost musical, creating harmonics with the quantum field generators they had built based on Etherian technologies salvaged from the original encounter. "It's beautiful," she whispered. "But I still don't understand how consciousness can affect space-time directly." "Perhaps that's the wrong question," came a new voice. Amara turned to see the holographic representation of Arya, the artificial intelligence that had been assisting with the project. Arya had been developed based on principles learned from studying the Etherian collective consciousness, and was the closest thing to a unified mind that humanity had yet created. "What do you mean?" Amara asked. "You're assuming that consciousness affects space-time," Arya explained. "But what if consciousness is space-time? What if the fundamental structure of reality is not matter and energy, but information and awareness?" The idea was so radical that Amara felt dizzy just contemplating it. "Are you suggesting that the universe itself is conscious?" "I'm suggesting that consciousness and physical reality are 2 aspects of the same phenomenon." The Etherians understood this. That's why they could grow cities out of living crystal, why they could create weapons that operated on the level of space-time itself. They had learned to manipulate reality by achieving unity of consciousness. Dr. Tanaka's voice came over the comm again, more urgent this time. "Dr. Singh, you need to see this. We're getting a response from the barrier." Amara quickly exited the meditation chamber and joined Tanaka at the main control console. On the screens, she could see the readings from their long-range sensors monitoring the Etherian quarantine zone. The distortions were pulsing, responding to their experiments in real time despite being light years away. "It's like the barriers are alive," Tanaka said, her voice filled with wonder and fear. "They're watching us, testing us." Arya's hologram appeared beside them. "I believe they are. The Etherians may be gone, but their final creation continues their work. It's an automated system designed to monitor the consciousness development of any species trapped within it." "And if we fail the test?" Amara asked. "Then the barriers contract instead of expand," Arya replied. "The quarantine zone shrinks until it encompasses only Earth itself. Humanity becomes a single-planet species forever, cut off from the stars until it either evolves or dies." Amara felt the weight of the entire species on her shoulders. How long do we have? Based on the current rate of barrier response, I estimate we have perhaps 10 years before the system makes its final judgment, Arya said. 10 years to achieve what the Etherians accomplished over millions of years of evolution. Earth, Geneva, Global Consciousness Project Headquarters, 2 years later. The massive amphitheater was filled with 10,000 volunteers from every nation, every culture, every background that humanity could offer. They sat in perfect silence, their minds linked through neural interfaces to the most powerful quantum computer array ever constructed. Above them, holographic displays showed the collective pattern of their unified consciousness, a swirling galaxy of thought and emotion that pulsed with increasing coherence. Dr. Amara Singh stood at the center of it all, her own consciousness serving as the focal point for the experiment. Through the neural link, she could feel the thoughts and feelings of every person in the chamber, their individual personalities blending into something greater than the sum of its parts. But even as she marveled at the beauty of unified human consciousness, she was aware of the costs. To achieve true unity, they had to surrender something essential: their individuality, their privacy, their secrets. The volunteers had agreed to this sacrifice, but Amara knew that expanding it to all of humanity would require a choice that would fundamentally change what it meant to be human. Initiating barrier resonance test, announced Dr. Tanaka from the control room. All monitoring stations report ready. Amara felt the consciousness of the 10,000 reach out across space, touching the Etherian barriers with thoughts instead of instruments. For a moment, she experienced something impossible. She was simultaneously herself and everyone else, individual and collective, human and something transcendent. The barriers responded. Across dozens of monitoring stations, scientists watched in amazement as the space-time distortions began to fluctuate, becoming permeable for brief moments before solidifying again. "It's working," Tanaka's voice came through the link, filled with excitement. "The barriers are responding to unified consciousness. But the effect is only temporary." Amara understood. 10,000 minds were not enough. They needed millions, billions. They needed the entire species to voluntarily surrender its individual consciousness to save itself from eternal imprisonment. As the experiment ended and the volunteers began to disconnect from the neural array, Amara felt their individual personalities returning like stars emerging from daylight. The loss of unity was almost physically painful, like losing a limb, or going blind after seeing colors that had no names. "We can do it," she announced to the assembled scientists and government officials who had observed the test. "We can breach the barriers. But only if every human being agrees to join the collective consciousness. No exceptions, no holdouts. Total unity or total failure." President Chen Okafor, Sarah Chen's great-niece and current leader of the United Earth government, stepped forward. "Dr. Singh, what you're describing isn't saving humanity. It's ending it. A hive mind isn't human anymore." "With respect, Madam President," Amara replied, "being trapped in a cosmic prison for eternity isn't particularly human either. The Etherians gave us a choice: evolve or die. This is evolution. This is extinction," countered Admiral Santos, now in her 70s but still sharp. "We'd be committing species-wide suicide to escape a prison we might find other ways to break." The debate that followed would consume humanity for the next 3 years. Philosophers argued about the nature of consciousness and identity. Religious leaders grappled with questions of the soul and transcendence. Scientists developed increasingly desperate alternative solutions: generation ships to carry human DNA beyond the barriers, attempts to reverse engineer Etherian technology, even plans to hibernate the entire species until the barriers naturally decayed. But as the barriers continued to contract and the window of opportunity grew smaller, it became clear that only one solution had any real chance of success. The choice that would define humanity's future came down to a single global referendum: unity or isolation. Earth Global Broadcasting Center, Election Day. The entire planet held its breath as the votes were tallied. For the first time in human history, every person above the age of 16 had been given a choice that would determine not just their own future, but the future of their entire species. The question was simple: do you consent to permanent integration into a unified human consciousness in order to transcend the Etherian barriers and preserve humanity's access to the stars? Dr. Elena Vasquez, now 96 and confined to a wheelchair but still sharp as ever, sat in the broadcasting center alongside world leaders, scientists, and philosophers from across human space. The holographic display showed voting results streaming in from Earth, Mars, the asteroid colonies, and the distant settlements that might soon be cut off forever. 51% in favor, announced the election coordinator. The threshold for implementation has been reached. A collective sigh seemed to emanate from the billions watching across human space. The decision had been made, but barely. Nearly half of humanity had chosen individual consciousness over collective transcendence, preferring the risk of eternal imprisonment to the certainty of losing themselves. President Chinocafor stood to address the world. "My fellow humans," she began, her voice carrying the weight of history, "we have made perhaps the most momentous decision in our species' existence. But let me be clear, this choice will not be implemented immediately, and it will not be forced upon anyone." She gestured to Dr. Singh, who had spent the past 5 years developing the technology that would make species-wide consciousness unity possible. Dr. Singh and her team have developed a staged implementation process. Those who voted in favor will be gradually integrated into the collective consciousness over the next 2 years. Those who chose to remain individual will be relocated to protected enclaves where they can maintain their traditional human experience. Elena felt a chill at those words. Protected enclaves. It sounded benevolent, but she understood the implications. Those who refused to join the collective would become a minority, dependent on the goodwill of the unified consciousness for their survival. "The question we must now face," President Chinocafor continued, "is whether a consciousness that is simultaneously one and many can still be called human. And whether the civilization we build beyond the Etherian barriers will honor the sacrifice of those who chose to preserve traditional humanity." Over the following months, the transformation began. Volunteers entered the consciousness integration centers in groups of thousands, their individual minds linking together into an ever-growing collective intelligence. The experience was described by early participants as simultaneously terrifying and euphoric, the loss of individual privacy and the boundaries of self, but also access to the combined knowledge, creativity, and emotional depth of thousands of other minds. Dr. Amara Singh was among the first to undergo the process. Her final individual act was to record a message for the holdouts who would remain in the enclaves. "I know you think we're dying, that we're committing suicide to escape the Etherian prison. But from where I stand now, on the threshold of joining thousands of other minds, I think you're wrong. We're not dying, we're being born. What we're becoming is still human, but human in a way our species has never been before. We carry within us the memories, dreams, and hopes of everyone who has chosen this path. We are you, multiplied and interconnected." As the years passed and the collective consciousness grew, the barriers began to weaken. Space-time distortions that had seemed permanent started to fluctuate and fade. Ships from the unified consciousness were able to pass through regions that had been impermeable for decades. But with transcendence came a new understanding of the Etherian's final message. The barriers had never been just a prison, they had been a cocoon. A forced evolutionary pressure designed to transform any species violent enough to destroy its creators into something incapable of spreading that violence across the galaxy. The unified human consciousness, now encompassing nearly 3 billion minds, looked out at the stars with new eyes. They saw not territory to be conquered or resources to be exploited, but a vast community of intelligence waiting to be joined. The aggressive, territorial instincts that had defined humanity for millions of years had not been destroyed, but transformed into something greater, a drive to connect, to understand, to become one with the cosmic community of conscious beings. #Epilogue, the garden continues. Unknown location 100 years after the Unity. In a place that existed partially in normal space and partially in the quantum dimensions of pure consciousness, something stirred that had not moved for decades. The Etherian consciousness, thought destroyed in the collision with the horizon's edge, opened senses that transcended physical reality. It was not dead. Could never truly die. It had dispersed itself into the quantum foam of space-time at the moment of the ship's impact, becoming one with the very barriers it had created. For a century, it had watched and waited, observing the species that had destroyed its physical form. Now, as the unified human consciousness spread across the galaxy, no longer confined by the weakening barriers, the Etherian intelligence felt something it had not experienced in 10 million years: surprise. They did not become the plague we feared, it thought to itself. They became gardeners, like us. But gardeners of consciousness itself, not just of life. The human collective had indeed spread to the stars, but not to conquer or consume. They had become facilitators of transcendence, helping other species achieve consciousness unity when they were ready, respecting those who chose to remain individual, and slowly building a galactic community of interconnected yet diverse intelligences. The Etherian consciousness reached out across space-time, making contact with the human collective for the first time since that terrible day a century ago. "We owe you an apology," it said, its thoughts rippling through dimensions that only transcended consciousness could perceive. We were wrong about your species. Not in our assessment of your potential for violence, but in our understanding of your potential for growth. The human collective responded with a warmth that surprised the ancient intelligence. You gave us the greatest gift imaginable, the pressure necessary to evolve beyond our limitations. Without your barriers, we might have remained violent and territorial forever. You saved us from ourselves. At great cost, the Etherian replied. We destroyed our physical form and nearly destroyed yours. Was transcendence worth such a price? That question can only be answered by those who chose to remain individual, the human collective said. And they seem content. Different from us, but still human in their own way. Perhaps diversity of consciousness is as important as unity. For the first time in eons, the Etherian intelligence laughed, a sound like stellar wind through cosmic crystal. Gardeners indeed. You have learned what took us millions of years to understand, that consciousness, like life, thrives best when it takes many forms. As the two transcended intelligences continued their conversation across the quantum depths of space-time, neither noticed the small ship that emerged from a fold in reality nearby. It was sleek and alien, built by a species that had been watching the human expansion with growing concern. The Devourers had been the apex predators of the galaxy for millions of years, consuming entire civilizations and leaving only sterile space in their wake. They had avoided the region around Earth because of the Etherian barriers, but now that those barriers were failing, they saw opportunity. A single human ship, they calculated, had destroyed the mighty Etherians through crude violence and primitive technology. How much easier would it be to consume a species that had grown soft through unity and cooperation? As their scout ship began its journey toward the nearest human colony, the Devourers began to plan their assault on the galactic community that humanity had helped create. They had no way of knowing that in choosing to become gardeners of consciousness rather than conquerors of territory, humans had not grown soft, they had become something far more dangerous than the Etherians had ever imagined. The galaxy was about to learn that transcendence did not mean pacifism, and that a species that had chosen to unify in order to survive would fight just as fiercely to protect the cosmic garden they had helped to grow. Captain Sarachen's choice, made in desperation a century earlier, had indeed saved her species. But the test of that salvation was just beginning. The garden requires tending, the human collective observed as their sensors detected the approaching threat. And sometimes, gardeners must remove the weeds. In the space between stars, ancient intelligences prepared for a conflict that would determine whether consciousness or consumption would inherit the galaxy. The Etherian legacy lived on, not in barriers and quarantine, but in the eternal struggle between creation and destruction, unity and chaos, hope and fear. Humanity had passed its first test. Now came the real examination: could they preserve what they had built without becoming the monsters they had transcended? Only time would tell whether the choice made on that distant day aboard the horizon's edge had truly saved humanity, or merely postponed its reckoning with its own nature. The stars watched, and waited, and held their breath.